All right, it looks like we are ready to go. Again, my name is Alexa Tinsley. I'm the Director of Programs here at Jett Foundation. Thank you all for joining us for our community webinar series. We really love being able to get all of this information into your homes nationally, so we're very excited to have you here. We are very grateful for Jill Castle. She is here helping us today, making this webinar possible, sharing her knowledge, her experience, and her expertise with us. So thank you so much for being here. Jill's an adjunct professor at Arizona State University. Her teachings have emphasis on special education, inclusion, collaboration, mediation, behavior, and assistive technology. She's also previously held roles as a special education director and is the director of her own consulting company, where she focuses on all of those things and more. So we are very excited to hear from her because she's a mom in the community and she's also a wealth of knowledge and experience. So before we get started, I just want to mention a few things. If this is your first webinar series or not, it is recorded, so if you need to come back anytime to watch it over again, if there's someone that wanted to be here that wasn't able to, you can always share the recording with them. So we will share that with you after the fact. We're gonna go with the flow in terms of how long this webinar takes. So if you have any questions, we will leave them toward the end. There is a Q&A panel at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. We will be prioritizing that, so please use that if you are able. We do monitor the chat as well to see if we miss any questions, and we will try to get to Facebook questions as well. But again, we will prioritize that Q&A panel just so everybody knows. And if there are any questions that maybe we don't get to or you think of after the fact, we will do our best to get them to Jill and get you an answer if possible. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Jill, and I'm really excited. So thank you so much again for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for joining today, and thanks for that nice warm introduction. I really appreciate that. Yeah, the credentials thing is always interesting because it sounds so it's awkward to list all the things that we've done, but the reason why some of it's important is because I do want people to understand that I've been at the special ed table or educational table, because it's not always necessarily SPED, but I've sat in every seat. I've sat for the State Department as a mediator, I've sat as a parent, I've sat as a teacher, I've sat as a director. So the reason that I share that is because when I present, it's really important to me that I share all the perspectives. I'm coming in from all, because I got the gift of being able to sit there and see all the different perspectives that everybody had. And that's usually where all the breakdowns are in education, is not being able to see why the teachers are saying this or why the special ed director isn't letting you have this. And I sort of have insight to all of those things. So I appreciate that introduction. Okay, so what I decided to do today was to cover all the myths and things that I hear. Facebook is wonderful in a lot of ways, but it's also tricky, especially when we're talking about special education, because I get on Facebook a lot and I just see a lot of erroneous information. I also see a lot of people in pain and upset, which is totally understandable. So they're giving advice from a place of fear or a place of frustration. And that isn't always the best place to come from if you want an optimal result. So I like to get out there as much as I can and help people as much as I can so that they're getting, information that's going to really give them the secret keys to the kingdom. Okay. Some I have some, not all, but some. So my son is 23 years old. So I've been doing this for quite some time. He has Duchenne, but he's also on the spectrum. So we had a lot of work to do throughout the years, and things have changed a lot. But I'm going to cover throughout the years all the common misconceptions that I have heard. So the first one is the biggest one, which is all DMD boys qualify for an IEP. So I have a website, and I'll direct you to that later because I have some free videos and snippets up that will go into this in more detail that you can watch, because we're trying to cover such a broad spectrum today. But there is a difference between an IEP and a 504. And the difference, there's a lot of differences between IEPs and 504s, right? But the main difference is the need for specialized instruction. And so a lot of people think for special education to get an IEP, you just need the category, right? There's 13 categories, you've got to qualify for one. Our boys can go under several, can go under orthopedic impairment, they can go other health impairment. And you know, sometimes they can go under autism, or they can go under you know, some other areas as well. So getting them qualified into the category, you're right, they all usually fall under one of those categories. That is a correct statement. But where the myth comes in is that that automatically gets them an IEP, and it doesn't. They have to, the second piece of that, after they qualify for one of the 13 categories, is that they have to have the need for specialized instruction. And that's really different. That brings me to the second bullet point. That's the difference between accommodation and modification. So in other words, 504 accommodates you. It takes the curriculum and everything around the educational situation, and it allows you to accommodate, to have access to what everybody else has access to. So it's a civil rights program, okay? An IEP is specialized, individualized instruction. So it takes the whole program and completely, you modify the entire thing. That's totally different than just accommodating. So some boys don't need modification and specialized instruction. Some just need accommodations. Some are doing great academically, and they just need a little bit of help with setting up the classroom or being able to use assistive technology to get some of the access to some of the curriculum, or they maybe need a little bit of social support. Those are things that could be accommodations, and they could be suited by a 504. People are terrified, especially parents of young kids, that if they don't get their son on an IEP, they're like somehow not doing something right, or they're being duped by the school, or they're being taken advantage of. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. Of course that happens, but it's not quite as common as everybody would believe. Most of the time, most of the meetings that I've sat in, and I've sat in hundreds of meetings over the years, nationally, actually, most people want to try to do the right thing. Not always, but normally they're coming from a place and they just don't explain it properly. And this is one of those things. Very often they'll say, your son doesn't qualify for an IEP, he only qualifies for a 504, but they don't explain why. They're not saying, well, in the evaluation that we took, we don't see a need for specialized instruction. All of these needs can be met by accommodations. They don't really go that far and explain that. So this tension starts because you know, parents think they're just trying to save money, or they're just against us. When in fact, they're just not really explaining that in order to go back and justify it to the State Department or to their SPED director, they need to actually show in the evaluations the data that supports them needing specialized instruction. So if you feel really strongly that your son needs that and that they need services and you're not getting one, we go in and we look at that data that's gathered by the evaluations. And I can usually spot the verbiage that either needs to be in there in order to fly, or maybe you need another outside eval and that kind of thing. So that's my first myth that I hear all the time. Hopefully that helped clear it up a little bit. I know there's always going to be questions, but I just want to give you kind of a broad sense of these items. So the next one is that all students, this is the second one I hear all the time, all students with DMD automatically get a 1-to-1 aid. Again, not true. Not saying that they shouldn't, not saying in utopia everyone would have one, but there's pros and cons to a 1-to-1. And there's also creative ways to do this too. So it doesn't always just have to be that 1-to-1. As a mom, I always wanted my kid to have that just so that I could not worry when he was at school. I just wanted him to be safe. But then I realized throughout the years, there were just so many more complicated considerations that you needed to look at other than just alleviating my stress. I had to get honest and realize that's really a lot of why I wanted that. And he was lonely and he had trouble, making friends. And there was just a bunch of reasons why I felt like he needed one. So the best way to explain this is I'm going to talk to you about how an IEP. Now we can talk about 504s too, but I'm just going to focus on the IEP since most of the time, if you're getting that level of service, most of the time you've now got an IEP. Not saying you can't, I'm not saying you can't get an aid with a 504, you can, but it's a little bit harder because there's more dollars attached to the IEP, so it's a little easier to get those supports and services. So I'm just going to focus on the IEP. I think of it as a cake, like a tiered wedding cake, and the bottom layer is the most important because if that's not right, the rest of the cake falls apart, right? So if you look at that bottom layer, that's the present level. That's those first pages. They call it the PLAFF now, PLAFFP. But it's basically the present level. That's where all the data that they get from the psychoeducational eval, outside evals, if you want to bring in clinical evals, any of that stuff, data from the teachers, data from the OT, the PT, all of that, all goes into that present level, right? And so first thing you need to watch for is if that present level page is like a half a page or one page, you're probably going to have issues. You need to have all the data in there and it needs to be really robust, because what happens is that the State Department, when we look at the IEP, it's like built like a cake. So that first level is the present level, right? The next layer of the cake is the goals. If the present level has got to have the information that drives the goals. So in other words, like I would look at, when I was the director, I would look at the goals and then I'd go directly back to the present level and make sure I saw data that supported the need for that goal. It's literally like you got to almost be able to draw a line to it. It's got to be that clear, because what happens is the State Departments come in and we do compliance. And so they actually look and make sure, and they have to go through each goal of each kid and make sure it's in the present, that the data supports the present level. And then the third part of the cake is the services. So you've got to have a goal that warrants a service. So what happens with the aid problem is that there's not enough information, like saying mom's worried he's going to fall is not give me a goal, does not give enough information in the present level that gives me a goal that would warrant that service. If your goal is he never falls, they're not going to make a goal like that because he has Duchenne and they fall, right? So you've got to get creative about this. If you're having a school district that's having trouble giving you an aid, or they're saying that he doesn't need one, we have to look at the present level first, and we have to come up with some data to support the need for one, right? Then we make a goal, and then they have no choice because all their services have to support the goals. So that's one thing I wanted to explain. Here's the other thing. Every situation is different. So just because everybody on Facebook seems to have a one-to-one isn't a good enough reason for your son to need one. And I'm not saying he doesn't, he might very well need one, but we've got to start realizing that all these Duchenne boys are different, especially in this day and age, because we've got all these interventions now and things that we didn't have. So they're all kind of on different levels. They're all in different places. They all have different goals and different needs. Some parents are more focused on happiness and social. Some parents are more focused on academic. Some kids like certain things and not others. I mean, there's just so many moving parts that we get all hopped up when we get on social media because we feel like we're missing out. Like so-and-so has this, why don't I? That's just a really tough place to come from. And I have found it less effective. So for me, I've always looked at, okay, what's the end result of what I want to get for him? For my kid, it was getting him in more mainstream classes. You know, he had some behavior challenges and he had communication challenges and he had trouble making friends. And so I wanted him, but he really liked the content of the typical classes. You know, a lot of our boys that struggle with speech or they seem to have cognitive issues, most of the time they're receiving is normal. It's their output and communication, right? So I always wanted him to be able to receive the information everybody else was getting, but he needed help with the output, right? The tests or the class participation, making friends. So I wanted him to have a one-to-one to help facilitate all that, right? So we had to build all of that into the present level, and we had to make goals that required someone to be there. So I had to make goals that a teacher could not do by herself. She couldn't get another student to do. I mean, it's a little bit strategic, right? But there are some young men who an aid, a one-to-one, actually inhibits their social ability to make friends, and keeps them back and keeps them isolated. So, you know, and you could have peers do the same thing, which would help him make friends, or you could have people in and out. So he learns some independence while being supported. So every situation is completely different. So don't compare. Creative solutions. There's no rules on how this looks. School does not, again, they just have to support that goal. So that doesn't mean he has to have the same aid all the time. It doesn't mean, you know, it has to be all day long. Like they might say he can meet his goals in these 3 classrooms without an aid, but he's struggling to meet that goal in this classroom. So this classroom will put an aid in. And that's how specific they get because of funding and because of lack of resources these days, especially now. They need to really, you know, move people around and get the best use of everybody. So it's not really personal. They're just trying to make all the pieces work. So for me, I always got in there and was like, let's be creative. You know, this is a great opportunity to take maybe kids from the honor society to come in and volunteer, or maybe take, you know, a kid in a higher class that's having trouble sitting still or having trouble with their classwork to come volunteer, and maybe it works for somebody else's. I've even had help on our IEP that actually helped another kid that was older. It helped one of his goals in his IEP. So there's just a lot of creative ways to do this. The example I'm going to give you, the best example on one-to-one that I have, and it feels kind of bad to share this, but I'm gonna, because it makes such a great point. But Anthony, when he was little, had a one-to-one who was, she was a lovely woman, very nice, very, very motherly. And I hate to say it, but very heavy and very big. So she wasn't helping him socially at all. She was actually mothering him so much that she isolated him constantly. And so I was like, gosh, I want a different aid. They're like, we don't have to change the aid. We can't change the aid because of the schedules. And I didn't have a good enough reason. And they, you know, we try to talk more about social goals, and nothing was working, and they weren't budging, and they were digging their heels in on this. So what I did was I went back and we called an IEP meeting, and we changed the present level and added some social skill goals that he needed to always be part of the class, and he couldn't be separated ever. Okay. And so then that was a goal. We made a goal that he would walk. What was it? I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something about him keeping up with everybody and staying engaged with the other students. And we did that because I knew that this person, he was on one of those motorized scooter at the time. So he would drive really fast. Reason we had it on him so young, he could still walk, but we had him on it for the campus so he could stay up with the classroom. So when they all walked to music, he didn't have to come later. You know, he could actually walk with them. Well, she couldn't keep up. She couldn't keep up with him, and she couldn't keep up all day. So that's how we got a new aide. So I know that's probably an inappropriate example. Maybe I should have thought that through better, but I'm just saying we got that strategic on what was best for him and what was best for him. And they ended up getting a really young person that was vibrant, that could move with him, that could keep up. Because those of you who know my son, he is like on the move, like adventure crazed young man. So found somebody very young, very social, and it worked out great. And then we were able to justify the change. So that's my inappropriate example. Because it's okay if somebody's, different people. This lady was wonderful. It just wasn't working for him. So, okay. PT should stretch in school. I hear this a lot. So there's a very big difference between clinical and educational PTs. They're trained differently. Their skill sets are different. All PTs have to legally do in an educational setting is help the child access the education curriculum and location. That's it. So I hear of lots of parents that have PTs that are stretching their kids in school. That is awesome. I think it's amazing if they're doing it correctly. I think that's great. But more often than not, PTs do not have that skill set. And even more of a red flag, many of them will try to do things with our sons that are actually counterintuitive, like strength training and doing stairs and things like that. If we don't really address it specifically, sometimes they'll start doing things like that. So we have to actually be kind of careful with school PTs. They're wonderful. They're very good at their job a lot of the times, but yeah, they're not clinical. So it's a different set of skills. So they also don't have to supply one. They only have to supply one for the minutes that are in your IEP. So again, if we go to present level and we go to the PT goal, they only have to provide services for the amount of minutes that are blocked in. So they don't, they sometimes do, especially nowadays, they're on consultation. Sometimes they only see them quarterly because they're only coming in to make sure they can access their desk and they can make sure the rooms are set up properly. And it's more of a physical accessibility issue. And it's not really a well-being or caring, ongoing therapy, so to speak. So it's just, you have to look at it a little bit different. I'm not saying there aren't some extraordinary schools out there that will do it or PTs that will do it, but that they don't legally have to. This is legally all they have to do. So again, we come up with creative solutions. Sometimes we would have the PT's minutes spent in the phys ed class, because he was struggling in phys ed and she could go in there. And at one point we didn't have an adaptive rec person or anybody trained adaptive PE. So the PE teacher at that time was not very creative of a person. So they didn't really understand how to modify the curriculum. So the PT was actually a young person and was really good at it. So we just built the PT services into phys ed. And then she would get in there and actually help with all of that. So we got kind of lucky. That's not something they have to do either, but it's a creative solution that sometimes helps. The other thing is teaching, getting in there and teaching, using her time to teach some of the peers or some of the people in the classrooms some things they can do to help your son. So kids love to be involved. And sometimes if you have a great group of kids, they can step up and do a lot to help, or make stretching a game that they do every day at the beginning of recess with them or something like that. There's all kinds of creative solutions. Okay. All right, special ed, SPED, we call it, is not a place, it's a set of services. This is a lot of our boys that have learning challenges or behavior challenges, social communication challenges. A lot of times it's a little archaic, but we still think of special ed. Well, I don't want my kid in the special ed room. It should never be that way. I mean, that's not how it's supposed to be. That's not the way the law is set up, and that's not philosophically best practice. Special ed is a set of services. They can be delivered anywhere, right? So you don't have to just go, just because a school has a program set up. Well, if he wants, like I remember being told, if he wants autism intervention, he has to go to the autism room. Well, technically that's illegal because you can't just clump everybody. They clump everybody with different disabilities, but they're not really even supposed to be doing that. It's supposed to be based on the goals. So they're supposed to clump individuals together that have the same goals, not the same disability, if you want to get really technical. Now, they don't do that because of lack of resources and time. And most people that have certain commonalities in their disability benefit from similar interventions. So why not put them together? But when you sit down, you just know you can create an individualized program. I mean, sometimes we're pushing in, sometimes we're pulling out, sometimes, maybe they're going to different rooms and programs. Like you can look in the district and see what's available across the whole district, maybe you don't want to move schools. That's sometimes a complicated issue. But even in your school, if they have a learning resource center, and then they have maybe a special ed room for, kids that really struggle, and your kid is somewhere in between, maybe you put him in the sped room just for reading. And then the rest of the day, he's everywhere out in all the mainstream. And then maybe at the end of the day, he's pulled into they call it an LRC or a learning resource room. And someone works on his organizational executive functioning skills and goes over all his homework or goes over all his stuff. So maybe you're moving him around to different places and creating this individualized program. That's like a really great way to do it because that is using the purpose of an IEP. Again, a 504, a lot of these things can be done with a 504 as well. The creative part, which we all know already, because the Duchenne moms are probably some of the most creative people I've ever met. But, we delivered occupational therapy in art. So we couldn't get a one-to-one all day long. So what we did was services come into art a lot of the times. So he actually kind of ended up with somebody great in art to support him, which was his favorite subject. And he wanted to be in the regular art class. He didn't want to do special ed art, social skills when he got older and physical education became harder for him. He would do a lot of the stuff on his scooter and we'd modify the thing, the events or kickball or whatever they were playing, he would do on his scooter. But there was a lot of downtime where they were doing calisthenics or things that he couldn't do. So we did do some PT in there, and we also did social skills training. We were lucky we had a social skills interventionist on campus who put together a small group of kids that were struggling with their social skills and turned some of the activities in PE into learning reciprocity and conversation while they were doing something physical. And then that made it a lot easier to modify stuff for him while working on social skills. And then we kept that as a social skill goal all the way up through, we didn't let go of PE. A lot of people let go of PE. He liked it. He enjoyed being around all those kids and he liked the laid back climate of PE. So we just worked on social skills in there and forgot all the physical stuff. Made him captain, made him go ask people things, made him organize, made him pick teams, whatever. We already discussed the idea of reading or math in a self-contained room. That's always an option. If we had behaviors, I would always have the kiddos take their hardest subject that they disliked the most. And those were the ones that were done in rooms where they could actually had behavior training, because that's where the behaviors would come up because they were trying to avoid the work that they didn't want to do. But then the rest of the, other classes that they loved, they didn't need that support. So it's just about being fluid in your thought and not just like one place or this place, or because he's here, he's got to stay here. Also year to year, we did different things every year. So just because your son's doing one thing when they're younger, by the time they get to middle school, their needs are going to be completely different. So you're going to need to relook at everything. Same with high school. So it doesn't mean they're stuck. It doesn't mean that's the way it's always got to be. And again, we did speech in groups for social skills. So we just knocked out a bunch of skills at once, rather than having more isolated time. He didn't need any more isolated time. All right, behavior. I am a behaviorist by degree. That is what my academia is in. My certifications are, a lot of them are in. So behavior is one of my favorite topics, but I got into it because I learned so much that behavior is communication, right? And so what is tough for me is that when I start counseling a parent or a family, I'll ask about behavior, and the first comment is always, especially in the Duchenne community, and I don't know, sometimes I wonder if it's just really hard to think of our sons as having more than one issue, you know, and it's just kind of overwhelming. But, oh, my son doesn't have behavior problems. He's a good kid. That's what I hear almost every time. And it's hard because I'm a behavior scientist, right? So behavior to me doesn't mean bad or good. It's not either. It's good and bad. I mean, there's good behaviors, there's bad. And what's good or bad anyway? There's appropriate and not appropriate. There's effective behavior and non-effective behavior. I don't really see it as good and bad. I see it as communication. Any behavior is communication. We're communicating a need that we have. So that tells us everything about how we need to educate somebody. And so I'm teaching at the Teachers College at ASU because I feel really passionate that every teacher should have a behavior background, because that's really all teaching is changing someone's behavior so they can learn. So we got to get out of this mindset that it's like you'll be in a team meeting, they'll bring up behavior services and everyone's like, no, my kid is really well behaved. I don't want there to be anything wrong with his behavior, but that's not what behavior in our educational world means. Okay. You have to change your behavior to learn. So if they're struggling with any kind of learning or any kind of social skills or making friends or getting frustrated and expressing that inappropriately or shutting down, not talking, you can have a kid in the corner that never says a word and everyone's like, oh, his behavior's fine. But it's not fine because he's shut down. So compliance, it's my next point, especially nowadays because we're so desperate with our resources in education and we're in such a difficult place in education that compliance is all anybody ever talks about. And from my standpoint and the work that I've done, that is not the most important thing. When a kid is acting out, they're telling you very important information. And if all you do is try to shut them down and get them to comply, you are not listening to what's wrong. And you're not looking at what they need to make the situation optimum for them to learn and for them to grow, not just academically, but emotionally and socially, and be well-rounded, happy individuals, as happy as they can be, right? That's what we all want. So it's kind of like a little pet peeve of mine, but it drives me nuts because that's all anybody thinks. Behavior's bad and we just need compliance. It's really, really short-sighted, and it really misses the gifts that you got from seeing when your son is going and doing well, and all of a sudden behaviors cropped up. I had a case a couple weeks ago. The mom couldn't figure out why all of a sudden the son was getting sent to the principal's office all the time. And I had to ask a few questions, and it turns out that was when a sub started. That's when it happened. So I was like, well, subs are not trained, and they're, and so the sub's in fear about managing the classroom. The kid feels the fear, his behavior's cropping up, he's taking advantage situation. It was like so easy. He was just telling everybody that he needed somebody stronger to support him. So we made some changes and everything was fine. So I'm just saying, be careful of not getting into that compliance trap. Yes, of course, they've got to be able to manage themselves enough to learn. Absolutely. And good behavior is important socially in order to make friends and keep friends and be liked by people and being included. But it's just that sometimes it's also a really good indicator of what we need to shift around to make them be successful. All right. So a functional behavioral assessment is a part of the IEP process. It can even be part of, you can request one for a 504 as well. You can request one anytime, works the same way as a psychoeducational eval, same 60-day timeline. And a functional behavioral assessment should be done by a behavior scientist that goes in and takes data, and they take, they look for the antecedents, they look for the triggered behaviors, and they look for the consequences, and they do like an ABC chart to figure out what's going on. It's like a little scientist going in. So if you have a kid that's not making friends, you can even use an FBA for that. He's socially shut down. I never hear of parents utilizing that tool for that. We'll have them go in and study him during recess and watch his behavior. And let's look at how we can, what's triggering him to shut down, or what's triggering him to give up and go sit in the back, or lash out, or whatever's going on. They go in, they get the data, and then from the data, you sit and you change the environment and you put additional supports in, so you change the outcome. Interventions, ABA, applied behavioral analysis. It started out being used mostly in autism. It's being used across the board now, hopefully. It should be. I used ABA. That's how I got into going back to school for all of the behavior. Was I used ABA. My son was delayed in his speech, so I used ABA to get him talking. We used ABA to get it to help his social skills, and we definitely used ABA to get him to read. PBS, positive behavior support, that's what I'm certified in, which is basically ABA without all the clinical hours of being an ABA therapist. I wanted a broader degree, so I got the ABA academics, but then positive behavior support is basically, the best way to put this is it's a more practical everyday guide of the ABA ideology. So, or methodology, I should say. So positive behavior support, I've got a training on my website on that for when, you can do it at home. It's basically figuring out what the need is that they're trying to communicate with their behavior, stopping the inappropriate way that they're getting it met, and giving them an appropriate way to get it met, and rewarding them for that so that they choose the easier, more appropriate way to get the need met. That's it. That's the science in a nutshell. And then PBIS is what most schools now, it's basically PBS, but on a school-wide scale. And if schools are using PBIS, then they're going to have people that are trained in it that can help you. Most people just don't even ask about it, so they don't offer if you don't ask most of the time. And social skills, lastly, social skills are a behavior. All of it's a behavior, right? Communication, all of it. So it's just something really important to know, and it's really important tools that you should not be embarrassed, and you should not be attaching negative connotations to. You should be using all of those services to help your kiddo be as well-rounded as possible. Field day and other outings don't have to be a nightmare. Oh my God, we hate field day. I can't, how many tears have we all shed because of field day? Oh my God. So, plan ahead. I know it's overwhelming. I know you got a lot on your plate. It feels like schools should be doing these things. I wish they were. They've got even more on their plate than we can imagine. So it's getting really tricky and hard. And if you do just push it off onto school. Some people have great schools that are doing a great job, but a lot of us, you give it all to them, and everybody's going to be disappointed and frustrated when the day comes around. So I know it's a lot of extra work. I recruit volunteers. I used to get other parents on board, get older kids to come from high schools and volunteer and help. Ask creative ideas from other parents, get in our community, ask people what they've done. There are amazing, that is what Facebook's good for. Amazing creative ideas out there. Same with recess. We used to, I remember my kid in elementary school was not being paid attention to at all. He couldn't keep up at recess, and he would just sit there by himself. So we asked one of the little girls, one of the popular little girls, I asked her what her favorite thing to do was when she wasn't in school. And she was like, can't remember the name of the game, but she's like, play this, basically like 7-Up or something. There's Heads Up or something like that game that had just come out as a board game. And so I bought it and I sent it to school with him every day. And he would just sit at a picnic table on the playground and put it out on the table. And couple of those little girls remembered me asking and saw he had the game. So they came over and started playing with him. Well, they were the popular girls. So all of a sudden more girls came over, and then the guys wanted to be around the girls. So they came over, and, you know, it ended up being really fun. And that's how we dealt with it for a little while. I also did lunch bunches where I, you know, once a week, certain kids that did really good in the class, the teacher would pick out, and they would get to sit with Anthony during lunch, and I'd bring in Chick-fil-A or something, you know. So just things like that, collaborating with the team. I call greasing the wheel because I hate to say it, you shouldn't have to do all this. In utopia, you wouldn't have to, but that's not where we live. So yes, greasing the wheel, little bribery here and there never hurt. Helped me a lot with those types of things. Transportation, that's tough. Field trips, I get a lot of calls about how they put their, you know, your son on the special ed bus and nobody goes with him and he's separate from the class. There's been teachers and administrators who don't want to allow some kids from the class on the special ed bus. It does get really tricky. Those are all individual scenarios. You can reach out for help. All they legally have to do is transport them. That's it. So the rest is greasing the wheel, collaboration, making friends, and figuring out a good solution for everybody. Okay. All right. This last one I came up with this morning when I was thinking, what's the other thing that I just watched that I feel like is so counterproductive? And it's this idea, you know, it's what nobody ever wants to talk about, but we as parents are in stages of grief, right? We're all in stages of grief. I can literally sometimes walk into a parents' meeting and I can tell what type of disability their child has by the way the parent is acting or the way that they're interacting and what stage of grief they're in. I can almost always get that right because there's characteristics, right? And in Duchenne, our grief cycle, we go through it. And as soon as we get through it and we're in acceptance, we take another hit. They have another thing that they get worse at, or things get harder, or something happens, and we got to go through the whole thing again. So what's tricky about our community is we're basically always in a stage of grief, right? One of the stages, you know, and I think as they get older, we just get better and faster about processing through it. But we're kind of always in something, right? And so we have to be careful that we're not taking those emotions, because most of us don't take very good care of ourselves. Most of us are putting ourselves last, so we're not getting the help that we need. And so all this grief is coming out onto other people, other things. I can't tell you how many apology letters I've had to send to providers. I had to send flowers to the head of our respite provider because I flipped out on her one day because, you know, I'm displacing my grief and I'm displacing my anger. And so there's this thing in the community that I see all this time, this, I got to fight for everything that he's going to get. And I felt that way too. And I did that. I did that. I was a very fierce advocator, and I was very proud of how fierce I was and how everybody squirmed when I came in the room. And I look back now, and after all my experience, as I got better and got less in that mode and more in a collaborative team building experience, he got better, and his needs got met easier, and magic started happening in school because I had people on my team that were so inspired and wanted to help and wanted to be part of it. And it was just such a better approach. Well, then when I started working for the State Department was the same, because we'd come in and do compliance. And so the whole staff was like afraid we were going to find something wrong. And I did a lot of parent training. And so there was sort of a little bit of this with me and the school team at that point. But then later on, I went to go on and I did a lot more teaching. I worked a lot in behavior classrooms, and then I eventually became a special ed director. That's when I got it. That's when I saw, because I was in and I would see how everybody would react to this parent coming in. And they're scared of the parents. They're scared. And you know what I figured out? Most of the time, they're scared because they really do want to do a good job. And they really do feel like they're doing their best, even if it's nowhere near what we need. And there's defensiveness and ego right off the bat. And if you can understand that the reason for it is because at the end of the day, they don't want to let people down. They don't want to let people down. So if you can break through that and say, hey, and let your ego down, because then when parents' ego goes up, school's ego goes up, nobody's going anywhere. And the kid's just suffering. And let me tell you another thing, as a SPED director, you can put anything you want in that IEP or 504, and they legally, you can follow up and follow up and follow up to make sure they're doing it. But at the end of the day, that is not what their program boils down to. A really great teacher. That's what their program boils down to. Or a teacher that you've got a really great relationship with, or a team that really knows how to serve him and work with him. And they work together and they have fun and they're inspired. And no amount of writing on a piece of paper and no amount of compliance complaints is going to fix that. It's just not. So I'm not saying that stuff isn't important. It is important, but it's just not as important as the collaboration and the building of the team. And your kid's going to be in school for at least 12 years, right? Because our boys now are going to college. They're doing all kinds of great things. So this is a big deal. You got to cultivate instead of just win. That's tough. It's just tough. Winning is just temporary. Cultivating and collaborating is building something for longevity. And our boys now deserve longevity. So that's my pitch on that. Think about the big picture. Even if you go to dispute resolution with the state, they're going to make you do mediation first. So I hear parents all the time, I'm going to sue the school. First of all, you don't really sue the school. You can file complaints where they then owe you compensatory services, but you're not actually like traditionally suing like you would an insurance claim. It doesn't work like that. So even before they give you compensatory services, real quick, the difference between a complaint and mediation, if you get to that level, which I hope you don't, the complaint is a technical error. They didn't do it in 60 days. They didn't call the meeting on the 10-day timeline. They didn't give you a prior written notice, all these technical pieces. Or they broke a law somehow. That's compliance. That's when you file a complaint. Mediation's for philosophical differences. Like, I believe he needs an IEP over a 504, and he doesn't qualify. And they're saying he doesn't and he does. Or I believe he belongs in this classroom and they're trying to put him in this classroom. Those are mediation because they're philosophical disputes. But even when you get to dispute resolution all the way to the end, they're still going to make you do mediation. So my point is, you're going to end up being forced to collaborate at some point, even if you don't approach it that way from the start and it gets ugly. All right, questions and answers. And I just want to say about this website, give me a day to make sure it's all fine-tuned, but I'm putting up classes that can be paid for and that are bigger, that are longer and super comprehensive, like Behavior 101 and things like that. But I've got I'm putting up a bunch of little snippets and a bunch of free stuff so that if you want to just dip in there and get some more technical information. I tried to keep things more general on this presentation, but if you want more technical information, give me a day, but I think my site's going to be pretty comprehensive and have some stuff you can look at for free. That's
awesome.
it.
Thank you so much. Like, I think that, like you said, there's so much misinformation around all this topic in general. So I really loved the like myth dispelling, because I think that's, a really interesting piece. So like she said, we're going to open up the floor for questions and answers. If you do have anything, please either put it in the Q&A box, or if for some reason you can't find that, please put it in the chat. We would be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Again, if you do, I know sometimes I have to sit on a presentation and just like think for a minute, and then I have questions after the fact. Please email them to either myself at alexa@jettfoundation.org, or Jill has her email right there. So if you want to shoot them to her too, I'm sure she'd be happy to answer any general questions you might have within reason. Karen says thank you. So thank you, Jill. No questions so far. So with that, I will say thank you again. Thank you to everyone for being here. We are so happy that we're able to provide this information to you. Again, thank you to Jill for providing her time and her knowledge, and really getting that information out there to all of you. So with that, I will wrap it up, and we will give you 6 minutes of your day back. But thank you so much again, Jill, for being here. We could not have done this without you. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. That's
Of course.
been an honor to help. And can reach out to me. And if they need more in-depth help, I can certainly help them, but I'll always just help with the initial issue.
Absolutely. And her website, like she said, give her a day, but it is there for more information. I know that this is a huge topic within the community. I get questions about it all the time. She is usually the one that I go to for help. So definitely go to her website to learn more, and reach out if you have any questions. So again, thank you all for being here, and thank you, Jill. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye, everybody.